And tonight we have the second of 5 public events that we organize in connection with our toolkit for today. And I would like to especially welcome our speaker, Pelin Tan, over here in the middle of the table. Each summer, the CCA, in the framework of our doctoral students program, invites scholars, practitioners, and thinkers to reveal their tools to propose concepts and methods in order to elaborate on a specific topic, and equally important, to make us think out of the box. And in the framework of this year's toolkit, we discuss activisms. We had the first event last night with Tatiana Schneider presenting. More precisely, we would like to interrogate the different forms that an engaged practice can take for scholars of architecture. And we ask, what motivates research? How can architectural research be mobilized in the service of society? Or how did or does architecture relate to larger societal issues? As in a changing academic landscape, there are obviously limitations to what can be said and what not, and yet more important, the question remains when and how to take a position. To discuss concrete cases of what by some might be considered as activist research and practice, and to complicate how architecture as well as architectural history and theory relate to society, we have invited 5 speakers from quite different contexts to present one of their recent projects. So in 5 public presentations at nighttime, our guests put up for discussion how, through their work, they analyze and interpret the social production of space, attempt to decolonialize architectural education in the case of Pelin Tan, propose to apply strategies to rethink housing and labor, create platforms to implement gender parity, and problematize racial politics in architecture history. And during the daytime in seminars and workshops, together with the doctoral students and residents at the CCA over the summer, they then further elaborate their own approaches and experiences with regard to the politics and economies of research, different research methodologies, and consequences for their teaching. Activisms have been a constant concern of the CCA, though, over the past years, most explicitly with some exhibitions, publications, and research projects. But what is more, the CCA understands everything it does as somehow activist, promoting architecture as a public concern. In a sense, the exhibition, such as Actions, What You Can Do with the City in 2008, already featured common activities such as walking, playing, recycling, and gardening to push against accepted norms and of behaviors in cities, sometimes even challenging legal limitations. And then The Other Architect in 2015 presented alternative, often collaborative practices to develop architecture as a field of energetic, critical, and radical research addressing the urgent issues of our time. Another thematic focus at the CCA that takes position is the environmental debate, and while the exhibition Sorry Out of Gas in 2007 back then captured alternative innovation spurred by the 1973 oil crisis, the recent exhibition It's All Happening So Fast in 2016 offered a counter-history of the modern Canadian environment, challenging basic assumptions about the country's relationship to nature by focusing on environmental disasters since World War II. And the multidisciplinary collaborative research project Architecture and for the Environment that we run currently explores the tensions between architectural evidence and historiographic narratives, for example, by proposing alternative curricula or writing heritage petitions. And activisms in terms of research, thus we argue with this toolkit, can take quite different and complex forms, encompassing different types of social, cultural, and political action and agency, given that the once existing binary structure of establishment versus counterculture, system versus movement, above versus below, power versus subversion is no longer valid. With recent developments of neoliberalism and then accelerated individualism and consumerism, previous societal achievements, for example, critical theory, diversity politics, or multiculturalism programs, in our post-political and one could add post-critical and even post-historical times, tend to have become compromised, if not co-opted or corrupted. So Pelin Tan tonight will present on decolonializing architecture education. Pelin is a sociologist and an art historian by training and was associate professor and vice dean of the architecture faculty at Mardin Artuklu University in Eastern Anatolia in Turkey, and that ran from 2013 to 2017. She was subsequently last year a fellow at the BAC in Utrecht and will begin an appointment as visiting professor at the University of Cyprus in the fall of 2018. Her teaching and territorial research combines academic and non-institutional structures to foster a methodology based on collective processes of knowledge production. She's involved in artistic and architectural projects that focus on urban conflict, territorial politics, and the conditions of labor, looking at forms of resistance, artistic methodologies, and theoretical perspectives to generate alliances and assemblies across disciplinary and territorial boundaries. So she's co-author of Autonomous Archiving, a publication in 2016, and has written on various topics such as transversal materialism for publications that are here on the table. Decolonizing Architecture Education, Towards an Effective Pedagogy is another title, or The Matter of Scale. And in a recent publication on positions on emancipation architecture between aesthetics and politics, an essay on cross-cutting spatial ontologies. So Pelin is second. Yesterday we had Tatjana Schneider, who presented on problematizing social engagement, and as an announcement, tomorrow we have Andreas Rumphuber presenting on rethinking public housing. On Thursday, Thorsten Lange, who will present on implementing gender parity, and on Friday night, then Charles Davis II, who will present on building Black Utopia. As an organizational note, as you might have noted, we are filming this event and the following discussion to publish them on the CCA website. After Pelin's presentation, we invite everybody to join a discussion, and to kick this off, we have asked participants of this toolkit to prepare some questions who are here at our sites to first enter into discussion. There's also time for Q&A. Lev Batishenko, Curator of Public at the CCA on the other end of the table, will moderate the conversation. So please join me now in welcoming tonight's speaker, Pelin Tan.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for all to be here tonight. Kim, when CCA team and Kim invited me, the structure was the public lecture tonight, and then tomorrow a seminar with the PhD students. So there's a different structure that was requested for me, that today I will show something what I'm doing, and what my practice is, what we are going through as a research, as a pedagogy. And then tomorrow I have another plan to focus more on conceptually on what decolonization is really, how is an action theoretically can come real or true, which is very difficult. I always were in between as a non-architect, non-trained, and coming from a social science, but by accidentally. I started to work in architecture faculties because there was no job, and then I was in the PhD program, which was in the architecture faculty of Istanbul Technical University, and so I became very involved with the architects. And that time, it was 2000, in the beginning of 2000. That time, the architecture faculty, my colleagues, that although after 10 years I don't work there, but still I have my colleagues, my friends that I collaborate. There was a kind of wave that in 2000, 2001, 2002, we wanted to really do something different in the architecture faculty, like really bringing some more contemporary art practices, discussions, urban issues, urban sociology, some kind of from different field and practice, some more flow into inside the academy. Inside I say academy because the architecture faculty is really in the center of Istanbul, but very somehow it used to be a very closed institution. But it changed a little bit after the Gezi Park occupation, which was, the Gezi Park is very near to the faculty. But it's also that 10 years, what we try to do there, bringing social scientists, different kind of people in the lectures, running kind of non-institutional alternative workshop platforms, and trying to engage more outside of the, with communities outside of the faculty. This was one thing, and I'm more involved in contemporary art practice, and coming from contemporary art, and it was very also the moment that the architecture student had a lot of interest to really get more to know artistic practice, who are dealing with spatial analysis, spatialities, urban, and so on. There was a kind of dilemma always, being inside the faculty, and then outside, I was part of some urban movements that was working a lot in the neighborhoods, local neighborhoods in Istanbul. And this was like really kind of different scene, different practice. And I always felt a kind of a dilemma, because I like to be in the academia. I like to be as a teacher and teaching. But also I like to be also in the street, and this was but I was started concerned how is possible to bring the flow of knowledge and methodology and through people, through activities, through maybe core to syllabus, to curriculums, which was later, when I became more a full-time teacher, became very important for me. I think education is a collective process. I mean, if you want to really do something, change institutionally, you by yourself, it doesn't matter how much radical you are, if you don't have a team, if you don't have a collective people, it is impossible to proceed and sustain different kind of educational structure. And there is a history of, in a pedagogical side, that we know from the 70s, from Paul Ferrier, from other kind of pedagogical discussion and practice. It's a kind of a lot of discussed and practiced area. The radical pedagogy, alternative pedagogies, alternative education has its own. But why it became, when it became important for us, I think, in my generation, let's say in our experience, and especially in the architecture faculty of ITU and after, with the Occupy movements, I think collective reading, collective listening, meeting in the urban space, occupying and setting up a library and setting up a kitchen and setting up a condition of learning together, and then the post-Occupy assemblies that pushed a lot, and the education and pedagogy became very much more spoken. This was at least in Istanbul like that. And this is why we realize that how is important is it is also in the street, but is also how to bring inside the faculty. We started a lot of different kind of structure in the theoretical courses, also in the studios, how to really try to bring outside the student, do something outside really, and engage in a different level. I very much rely on the economic geographers, Gibson Graham, Catherine Gibson and Judy Graham. I spent last 15 years reading their following their theoretical approach, especially on the ethics of locality, that they wrote a lot. Community economy, I mean, here is more community economy, how to proceed to collective action, with what kind of sustainability, what is the heterogeneous economy of that. If you are in an activist field, these kind of things are really important to really practically to set and theoretically also. I tried to, the institutional question was very important because I like institutions. And when we speak about education and pedagogy is related to institutional structure, is about institution actually. Schooling, university, academia. But then you really want to you want to insert things, you want to change and transform, you want to have a fluid institution, which is nearly impossible. But how, with education, with very interesting education that you want to do, I'm speaking here general because it can be very different in different countries, in different cities. But I was more interested how the formation of the society, what we see, what we experience outside of the academia, how can we really make sense that can go into the vein of the institutional body. This is, I think, very, I was thinking a lot about that. The methodological question also I will discuss through this presentation, but tomorrow morning we will go more deeper about the discussion about methods and methodologies since 70s, 60s, especially in social science, with post-structuralism, other kind of later post-colonialism. There's a kind of history of methodological discussion and history of methodology in the social science. I think we will go more deeper. I want to go more deeper tomorrow and share more references and books and the question of methodology. I mean, how in research we need a method, but then at the same time we are criticizing. We want to use multidisciplinary methodologies and different. How in architecture we can do that? How in architectural theory, architectural history, architectural anthropology, or ethnographical research and methods can function. And then we can move, I mean, how the decolonization plays role. What is the methodology of decolonization is another discussion which connects to the this theory of decolonization and practice of decolonization that has a kind of different kind of stage in different geography and region and territories. It's very multiple, and the colonizer and colonized subjects are totally I mean, in my case, it's very mixed mash. I mean, it's not so clear, the boundaries. I was, when I was in Istanbul, some of my colleagues, architects, professors, they resigned from their job position. And by invitation, they went to southeast of Turkey, near Syrian border. There's a city called Mardin, and they established an architecture faculty. That time, I was in MIT in visiting, and immediately I wanted to move with them, and they asked me to join them, and I accepted. And that was the time in southeast of Turkey. The peace process between Turkish government and PKK, the Kurdish movement, started, and this was very important for us, the peace process. There was a new university in Mardin Artuklu University, and the faculty, there are many faculties, but architecture faculty has been asked to my friend, my professor Uğur Tanyeli, who's one of the most important architectural historian theorists of Turkey, and he asked me if I'm interested. I said, of course, and we all resigned from our position, and we moved there. I especially moved there. Some of us commuted, and the main aim was, for us, we had our own aim to really, we were really bored with the architectural education in Istanbul and Ankara, in those cities. We wanted to be more free. We wanted to have more socially engaged architectural education. We wanted to really try. We don't know, I mean, we're not experienced. Still, I am not, but I want to really, and we all together, we wanted to really take it as an experiment and give our effort and give a try. And here is the, I mean, I put some maps that you can, because if I say Mardin, most people think Madrid. They mix, some of my colleagues. Some people thought that I moved to Spain, to Mardin. So it's better that we know where we are. Just a little bit information, I think, is important. When we just go back, the things, territory and pedagogy, in that case is very much related. I mean, territory is important to know what are the dynamics, what are the legal procedures and the legal settings of a territory, and a territory is could be a spaces of a colonized region in space, but is a very complex relation always. This is another topic. We might go deeper tomorrow morning. And things is important for us, and things for me more means kind of non-human elements that we are looking, especially as a spatial practitioners and especially as architects. And I think it's important to know the region is always under state of exception. Is that there's a special law always applied in this whole region. And there's a history, I put very little summary, but that you can get a kind of expression, you know, where I'm talking about. And maybe you used to, maybe you have some experience from different geographies, from different regions that you used to. This peace process, which lasted, I think, only 3 years, then the conflict started again. Maybe I'm not an architect. This is why it's very important for me. When we speak about pedagogy and education, I mean, in social science, humanities faculties, things are a little bit different. But in architecture faculties, it's important that the backbone of the faculty is the design studios. And the design studios are generally, in our case also, is surrounded with elective courses, core courses, and core courses are generally architectural history, theory, art history and theory, and other kind of elective main core courses like structure and this and that. And then what we were doing, we tried, just give a little bit impression what we did. First, the studios were really 1 year, first year, second year, third year, fourth year studio. And then we tried to do parallel, cross-cutting year studio. This didn't work. I mean, sometimes the students, or students says that we're using them as a testing, which we never can do in Istanbul or in Ankara. I mean, in a very established architecture faculty, you cannot go this kind of, you cannot change so easily. But the curriculum or the syllabus, but we were more flexible in that. And the studios we decide together, especially my colleagues who are the studio leaders, and then we have we have the head of the department, and then we have a dean. And in my case, I'm the dean, and then I try to always make sure that the faculty, the head of the faculty. I mean, this sounds not experimental or alternative pedagogy, but I make sure that the head is architect, because I need someone who really organizes well the studio and makes the coordination between And for us, the most important thing is the topics, of course, to choose for the studio, and to really focus on Mardin and around Mardin. I will give information why. And then we have the research. Most people, academic people, they're running their own research. I was running also the postgraduate program, master and PhD program. Especially my profession is postgraduate, how to really form the postgraduate program in an interdisciplinary way. And then we have the master and PhD thesis, which is also a very important part. If you want to really change the knowledge production, master and PhD thesis, making it is for me a treasure to really good tools to use it, if you can use it in the right way. I mean, it's a very, we know that it's a very institutional process. I think everybody will agree with me. No? But in a very this kind of territory, you can use the master and thesis and the doctorate thesis in really producing decolonized knowledge. So Mardin is a city, town, small, surrounded with, let's go back to the map, to other cities like Gaziantep, Şanlıurfa, Diyarbakır, Batman. It's semi-Arab and semi-Kurdish region. Some cities are very Kurdish, some cities are very Arab, and the administration is Turkish government. I mean, it's Turks generally. And 3 languages spoken, Arabic and Kurdish and Turkish. And Turkish is generally the 3rd language has been spoken. The street language is Arabic and Kurdish. And the student we have is from the region, Arabic and Kurdish student. So most of us, we had to learn Arabic or Kurdish. Arabic is difficult to learn after some age. Kurdish is more easier, but you have to. I mean, for a while living there, you need to understand. It's a very traumatic, and politically engaged and traumatic territory. It's also very complex because of that. It's a very tribal territory. Arab and Kurdish tribes are really running the region, and it's in the Syrian border. The city is only 20 minutes by car to the Syrian border, and also near to Iraqi border too. So it is in the borderline. It is surrounded with different kind of ethnically language spoken communities and towns, and it has a kind of political past, traumatic past from the 80s. Many village eviction, many land eviction, mass killing, and so on. And then we have the current ongoing situation, and then we have the borderline Syrian war and other kind of conflict. Mardin is surrounded with 4 official refugee camps, and there was 3 temporary refugee camps that's dismantled now. And the city, inside the city, there are many Syrian refugees who are living also. And you see the other cities, Gaziantep and Şanlıurfa is also highly populated Syrians and surrounded with refugee camps. So this is the case. And then the other layer is the archaeological layer. Mardin and surrounding, there is 2 important Neolithical sites. One is Göbekli Tepe, is just included last week to UNESCO heritage site. Is a Neolithical site from 2000 before history, and there are many villages. Most of them are Hellenistic and Roman settlements, and it needs a lot of excavation, it needs a lot of other archaeological, but because of the civil war, because of the conflict, it's very difficult to proceed archaeological. I think one project is going on called Mapping Mesopotamia by Professor Zeynep Bahrani from Columbia University. She's visiting a lot Mardin and the surrounding, and is doing a lot of artifact mapping with her team. I think this is the very important research, I think, that she's really keen trying to do that. We choose different kind of topics in the undergrad and postgraduate. In the undergrad, we try to focus on Mardin, on the city and surrounding. In urban studies and architecture, not so much work is being done in this region. I discovered when I moved there. The bad thing about that is there is no, it's hard to reach archives. It's hard to find any, I mean, for example, I will show one city, it has nothing, no research has been done. It's hard to find material and bibliography. But the good thing is you can do it. You can write it. But then there is another bad thing, because we are under a curfew and continuous state of exception, it is hard to access. It's always surveillance and so on. Interviewing people is difficult. You need testimonies, narratives, and it's very difficult to get because people are afraid and so on. This we will speak more deeply tomorrow morning, I hope. Also, the other problem was for me. I mean, in the studio, we deal with scales, different kind of scales. You know that in the studios, like from building to a neighborhood, to a town, to a region. The problem of scale became very important for me. Not a problem, but kind of an issue, which I felt there in this region, or working in such a territory. Because everything is so quickly, so fast politically changing, going further and back, left and right. I mean, it's really, you have to really prepare it. Every week, every month is something. And the constellation of those towns, they're affecting each other, the border city, Nusaybin affects, I mean, when Nusaybin gets bombed, inhabitants are moving out, migrating to Mardin, to Batman. And then if something happens in Diyarbakir, a curfew affecting the other. So I experienced that if you want to research one city there, as a solid city, as a closed city, is impossible. You have to really always keep in mind the scaling and the constellation that is under move continuously, and in the move in time and space differences, the effect of that. The other problem is that the territory is heavily politically charged. If you want to come with whatever you touch, it is about violence, and violence in a different scale and degrees. You have to work on violence also as an architect. What violence? What is violence? I mean, you can read theoretical stuff about violence, of course. I mean, also as a concept, what is violence? One thing was that how to approach, find the studio topics or kind of research topics that really we can imagine the territory, we can imagine this city, that village, from a non-charged way. This I thought could be one way of decolonization methodology, that we don't speak with the same narrative of violence in this region, but how to speak about, for example, this was our diploma project in 2016 autumn. There is a international discourse going on in climate, in architecture, in urban and spatial practice. but then you are also in this kind of locally charged area, territory, and how to make a link in a discursive way, first thing. Secondly, is not a faraway concept, of course, Anthropocene, Capitalocene. It's very much related to violence and war and ecological colonization too, that we discovered. I mean, when we speak about water dam in southeast of Turkey, that we call it security dam, is mostly weaponized landscapes. Is not primarily made for ecological reason to upgrade villages' life or about water or something or cultivation. It's more. It's been used for. Building water dam is being used for evicting land and villages and creating a secure knots along the borderline. There. So this is one example, for example, how to look to water dams. How to make the connection between ecology, violence, and Anthropocene, and so on. It's same for small-scale villages. There are many villages. Mardin used to be a Christian Arab city, Orthodox Christian, as a Syrian city, town, Armenian town. But now, of course, you don't see any Armenians there, and you don't see any Christian Arabs there. But if you go to Beirut, you can meet many people from Mardin. If you go to the Armenian neighborhood in Beirut, so there is a kind of violence that had happened that we don't know there. Yeah, this is a kind of situation, and then you can think of a town, a space that its identity is reconstructed. You don't know what was the other identity, but there are many monasteries, many churches, and you can get from architecture. You can get what kind of people were living there 100 years ago. And there are many different kind of villages, like Dara village. It's a Kurdish village now, but it used to be an Orthodox Christian village in the past, and very past a Byzantine space, I think. I work in this village a lot. It's a kind of a small-scale village, 20 minutes between the border and Mardin. This village has been excavated by one of my professors in Istanbul Technical University. He died. He's not alive. It was very funny. In 2000, in summer, he wanted to bring me there to work in summer. He was bringing always students to Dara. But that time I couldn't make it. But it was very interesting that after nearly 10 years, more than 10 years, I was working there in this village, and he excavated is a former Roman garrison, border garrison, and it's very much there are many patterns that the houses sits in and together and on the archaeological patterns. So if you're living in a house there, if you go, you might have a big, like 15-meter depth water cistern under this house. So it's many water cisterns and many other archaeological artifact is there. But it's now very Kurdish city. It's Kurdish village, I'm sorry, not city. There is a kind of policy in Turkey that came in 2005. Firstly, that was applied in the big cities. It's called, direct translation to English is urban transformation, kentsel dönüşüm in Turkish. And this is a policy that it gives the power to municipalities that they can decide whatever neighborhood put a special state of exception policy, another kind of article of this big policy, that this neighborhood needs to be demolished, preserved, restored, or it gives a big power to decide for the neighborhood. It was applied in a gypsy neighborhood in Istanbul, which is the most famous case, and most of the people were illegally evicted, and it enables to also the authority to change the property papers, the property statute, yeah. I mean, in one day you can use your property, even if you are the owner. So it's not only for the tenants; it's also for the. It's very much threatening also the ownerships. So this was a big discussion. The Architectural Chamber of Istanbul sued the government few times because of this policy. It was really a war between the activists, urbanists, urban planners, academics, and architects against the current ruling party. And there was a lot of, I was in the urban movements that time, so we were really physically faced this issue. And this was started to apply in different little towns and cities in Turkey too. So wherever you go, even in Mardin that doesn't need, they generalized the policy with earthquake policy. So the policy went into each court case of the architecture chamber. The government changed and enlarged the rights of the policy from the authority side. You can ask me a question. I can talk hours on this policy. Is another issue, but it's very strange that in Mardin, a small town who doesn't need, there will be no earthquake. Maybe ISIS will bomb, maybe others will bomb each other. I'm sure, but there will be no earthquake. But there is an earthquake policy, and there is a housing speculation, very high housing speculation going on. So you can see that town, there's an urbanization going on in the town, but there is no urban. I mean, the town is not urban. So you can see very clearly the separation that also, like Henry Lefebvre is talking a lot about that. We start to insert in the studio in a different way, like maybe it makes sense with Andreas' talk. We worked a lot on the labor condition of architects and planners, and we really inserted such topics into, especially into master and PhD studio. I was running the advanced architectural studio for a long time, and they said to me, Pelin, you are free, you can do whatever you want, when my professor invited me. So I don't need to do design. So that is a joke, of course. All my students were free to do what they want to do. Some were doing video, some were doing models and design. But we were deciding a concept and readings and invited guests and some, like in this studio, each student had to do, I mean like 10 master and PhD students had to do their own research. They did in the beginning, but after the midterm meeting, they decided that they want to put each singular research into a common dissemination platform, graphcommons.com. It's a kind of mapping program done by Burak Arıkan, a Turkish artist. You can enroll and register, and you can do whatever mapping you want to do. So they came that as a final. They don't want to submit separate project or paper or whatever. They want to combine and make it visible, their research on labor and other things. So this was one project. Rural Commons. It was with my colleague, Jesko Fazer, who is a professor in Hamburg, experimental design. He came with his student, and we did run a workshop called Rural Commons, collaborating with a Kurdish farmer. And this was more discussion about commons, commoning, and new ruralism, and what does it mean in Mardin, because most of the Arabic and Kurdish citizens there are farmers. But then there is a lot of threat of agricultural policy and so on is another issue. But this was also understanding the space, the territory from a rural perspective. It was not so easy to run a workshop. The German government decided that this territory is a red territory, no-go territory. So Jesko lost the budget for the trip because his dean said he doesn't want to give, to provide doesn't want their student to go there, come to Mardin from Hamburg. So 2 times it was cancelled, but then Jesko convinced the dean and so on, and then he brought the German student, and it was very interesting. We did a lot of project in the research, observation, intervention in the undergrad and the post-grad courses with refugee camps. There is 2 types of refugee camps. One is run by government in Interior Ministry. It's official camps. You cannot go inside those camps. You need permission to go. And since 2 years is really not possible. Everywhere is state of exception without permission. You cannot go. I mean, you cannot go. It's hard even to go out from your house. I mean, so it's very marginal situation right now. But there was few temporary camps that we experienced. One was that the Mardin bus terminal was occupied by Yazidi migrants from Shengal, who by walking escaped from ISIS and just entered our city, and they were located to the bus terminal. This was the time, by the way, it's important that the mayors were Kurdish mayors and was run by Kurdish party. It's very important. They are in prison now. One of my colleagues, we were running the third year studio. And we engaged more observing how they are setting up their habitat and life, and how they are inhabiting the bus terminal. This was one thing. Another example was near Diyarbakir, in a very existing park, green space, that were migrants located there. And this is the camp. And this is the bus terminal, just giving small information that you can imagine. This is behind my faculty, so by walking is like 10 minutes that we can go. And for me, the most important thing was in the pedagogical structure. I was not interested to design refugee houses or emergency something. And I said to my student, this is easy, you can do. Or maybe this is what is being wanted by architects. But I said, I don't want that. I want the opposite. How we can learn from them. Firstly, how they inhabiting and in emergency putting their life, how they using existing. This was a new bus terminal, for example. Before, it was going to open. Just that time, the migrants came and they occupied inside the space for some time, and they set up a kitchen, mobile kitchen. They set up later schools, primary schools, and my students were helping, because most of them are Kurdish, and they can speak Kurdish and Arabic, and it's very easy with the language. The language is the most important thing to access. And for me, it was the important thing how people are using, how we can learn from design as a design perspective, different kind of. In the second term, we focus on another camp. I mentioned one of the temporary camp, which was in the park in a green space between Diyarbakir and Mardin. When I say temporary camp, means self-organized camp by NGOs, by the migrants themselves, helping with the municipality. For example, in this first, we look to the actors in this camp. Who are involved? Municipality, Rojava Association, Diyarbakir Sur Municipality, Doctors Beyond Borders, Mesopotamia Ecology Association, which was also partially, which was established by my master PhD student, and so on. So. It was also important to look how actors are engaged, how they are informing the space. And then the second thing was important, what kind of dynamics plays role in in organizing the space. This was like the gardens in the camp, mapping the gardens. I asked my student to design the existing design elements. For me, I think archiving digitally in that sense was very important. I think archive is one of the most important, can be a decolonization tools, which we know normally is a modernist institutional tool. This is the practice we know about that. We created a small manual booklet in Turkish, in English and Kurdish. And this camp, after one and a half year, was dismantled. The migrants were moved to an official camp. So we had only, now we have this whole photos and digitalization that we have, but everything is gone. So for me was also important to think about temporariness and permanency. I mean, what is temporary, what is permanent, and how we can deal with that. What kind of design research tool we can create. It was happening in a different way. I mean, 6 months can be very long, and then 1.5 years. I mean, you go and rent a house and you live 2 years, One of my friends was telling me the other day, oh, this is very temporary, 1-2 years. I said, why? You rent a house and you live 2 years in a house. I mean, and a camp, why do you call a refugee camp for 2 years temporary camp? I mean, it's a permanency in 2 years, This kind of things. This is a kind of the Mesopotamia Ecology Association, and some of my master students, they help with the garden and seed exchange. This is the Dara village I spoke about. This is one of the scale you're seeing, different kind of layers of artifact. And we did also many analyses of this village. We still continue. There is another town. I'm sorry, I'm loading a lot, but I want to show different scales, and we can go deeper in the morning tomorrow. You can ask more questions about that. This is another town. Actually, this is the birthplace of Kurdish movement, this town, Lice. And there is nothing has been done on Lice, because the Lice is continuously under bombing. There is no material to really, and nobody speaks also. I mean, you cannot really interview so easily someone. And one of my master student, she said she really wants to, I mean, I wanted to do something, and the easiest way is also to use what I said, the master and PhD student, if there is in thesis. If there is nothing on Lice, let's do it, not to write an article or not a book, but do a thesis that goes into record of the governmental record. When you do a PhD and master, it is stored, it goes to higher education court, it passes, and so on and so on. It's a kind of institutional process also. So for me it's important that such topics to go into thesis. It's not only simply publishing an article about that or publishing a book about that. It goes into academic knowledge production. So Lice, we went to Lice 2 years, visiting. There was a curfew. We stopped. We couldn't enter the city. We waited. My student and me, and my student master deadline was going longer and longer. This is something that is the difficulty about working on this kind of territories. I mean, the research goes long, and you stop, you give 6 months, you wait, the curfew is lifted, and then you find a way to enter the city again, and so on and so on. And we had to find a case of the city. I mean, the whole city is a case, the whole town is a case, but we found this earthquake container neighborhood, container settlement, that was built in 1975, and still a Kurdish community living there since 2 generations in those container houses. And they appropriated the containers, which we heard that was designed and built by German architects that we are searching for. We couldn't find yet. But we found the master plan of Lice in the architectural archive in Germany, because it was also difficult to find the master plan that was designed and done, drawn by Germans, we heard. So it was really through gossips and little information we started, and we tried to go to find little things that can make sense. The municipality is continuously bombed. This is why the archive is gone. So that was the problem also, finding the master plan was difficult. So our aim was to focus on the appropriation of the container houses, how an earthquake container can last since 1975, and designed as 52 square meters, as a living space, but expanded with self-architecture that the inhabitants they built, expanded, and continue to live. This is a material, this left side, and this is one of the wall, because there was later a fire that some of them were destroyed. But still, of course, there are many houses. But we checked. I mean, this was I don't know the direct translation in English, but the soft material, the white soft material, yes, became it's a stone now. It became a process, and this was in between the walls of the containers. Because it meant to be container, earthquake container, like a refugee tent, meant to be a temporary material, temporary living spaces. I mean, no one thought that these houses will sustain through the years. So we were looking to the materials also, how they transform. But I have a video, but it's in Turkish and Kurdish. It's difficult to when we are working on the editing and translation. This you can see that this guy is explaining through this material the history of violence of Lice. I mean, he's just describing, and then what happened, and so on. And I think we will finish it in 6 months. We have some time to edit and to do the subtitle. But it's so interesting to learn through one stone, or used to be not a stone in the past, the history of the violence of Lice. Field is very important. I'm summing up, Kim. It's a big problem for me to really how to approach in specific condition. I think it's very situational, but then there are concrete things of like violence. What is violence? And what is ruins? Ruins like those container houses, ruins like the Roman ruins in Dara village, ruins like a refugee tent. I was conceptually working a lot to understand. And I believe the last thing is that when you set up with your team, yourself, this kind of pedagogical adventures and structure in a faculty, luckily we were running the faculty, so it's a big freedom that you can do many things, but you feel alone. Education is a very solidarity practice, I think. And we are in contact with Campus and Camp. Campus and Camp is an educational platform in Daesh refugee camp in Palestine. And they also, Alessandro Petti and Sandy Hilal, who were the initiator with the 3rd generation refugees in this camp, they set up Campus and Camp with Decolonizing Architecture initiative. They also asked me, we're feeling alone, Pelin, and we want to do a consortium, pedagogical consortium unofficial. And like me, Eyal Weizmann, and the pedagogical department in Leuven that used to visit them a lot. So kind of a solidarity that we can keep up together, visiting us and discussing together, keep in solidarity to understand. And I brought my student there, master and PhD student. We did run a 3 days workshop called Autonomous Infrastructure that we talked about from refugee camps to education, how autonomous infrastructure, as a metaphorical sense. I mean, how is this possible? How solidarity can create autonomous infrastructure? And actually, David Harvey joined us. He came with me. David Harvey visited us 3 times in Mardin, and he stayed 1 month with us. And this was a big solidarity for us, what he did. And I think keeping up with this kind of structure in a loose way, we went to Pikba camp, to Midilini. We had meetings, workshop with refugee networks in Athena. And this was, I think this kind of, I mean, if you speak about radical pedagogy, it includes solidarity activities. It should. I mean, otherwise, it's impossible. You cannot exist, and you cannot sustain sustainable structures. You will be alone and under pressure because you are continuously under pressure. There is no space to breathe. Yeah. Thank you. These are other research assemblies that we are collaborating. This is another project we're doing, solidarity spaces. This could be, we can talk tomorrow too. You can engage with this project too. We will do open call soon. It's with Malkit Shonan together with Galit Eliat. And we wrote a manifesto also. It's a bit fictional, metaphorical, but the Silent University is a refugee by and for refugee, an artistic project, but also working thing. I'm sorry, I go beyond. Huh?
No, it's thanks, Pelin, for sharing your reflection on your pedagogy.
Many things, sorry for that.
No.
Yeah.
I think it's great that you reflect both on like the institutional and curriculum aspects, as well as the content of your teaching and the goals involved in at the same time you reflect on. And you show clearly how it is thinking through locality being applied in the social context of the village. And I think that is something also to discuss further. To what extent was it specific to the situation that you found yourself in teaching, and how might it be applied to other situations? But maybe we move forward to the comments by the participants.
Let's do that. Is there one that wants to begin, or should we just pick someone?
Question, you prepare it. I have question to myself.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was a lot of information, as you said. I guess I could start with a really easy kind of question concerning the radical and alternative pedagogies. And so I was wondering, what is the role, or what is the educative role of architecture, or rather, as in the case that you just shown, how Mardin can educate architects themselves. So, like, how can you learn from Mardin as an architect?
How can you learn from?
Yeah, well, like, because you talk about the kind of like back and forth.
Okay, I understood. Yeah. I think nobody wanted to come to study with us because we were on the last list of architecture faculties of Turkey. And my family was really angry with me when I resigned from my job, which was one of the best architecture faculty. They said I'm crazy to ruin my career. So in the first, we were dealing with 150 students in Istanbul Technical University generally, which is the normal architecture faculties, yeah. And then we had here 30 students each year, which is a big, for us was a big lucky advantage that by face-to-face you can speak each student's project and you can give more time and so on. But then later, also the master and PhD program, nobody was applying. Yeah. And then because of us, because of our name, people were coming and applying, but there was no, but it expanded every year. And we were, just your question, we said, hey, it's more interesting. It is very sorry to speak like that, but it is more interesting to study architecture here in Mardin than in Istanbul or in Ankara or Izmir. Of course, Istanbul is very layered global city. There are many local situations, physical layer and social layers, social fabric. Of course, in Istanbul, you learn more. I mean, when you set a studio, there are many topics, many social urban cases that you can focus on. But in a small city of Mardin, firstly, what an architect can learn is that the architecture in education, in institutional sense, architecture education doesn't only exist in big cities. Because the architecture faculties, I mean, in the 20th century is always in the urban, because architectural practice is very urban. And the architect as a persona is urban. It's coming from urban families, upper class families in the 20th century. I mean, it's very rare you found coming from a Kurdish village, a guy studying, becoming an architect and go, I mean, it's not easy to find this kind of, I mean, as a profession is very gentrified, very, I mean, it's a close profession, yeah, from 20th century. It was the case in Turkey. It was very formed with modernity, yeah, the early modernity, Republican modernity of Turkey. So this was one motto we set. I mean, there are many cases. It is also, Turkish people mostly forget, but this is also part of the country. And there are many, although it's very hard to take, and many things happen very fast in Turkey. It's not like other cities like Scandinavia or Canada. Things are, political transformation are slow or something. I mean, it happens very fast, and you have no time to digest, and you have to really play with maneuver to, and I think this gives kind of a flexibility of. But there is a bad things of an attraction also. This southeast of region is highly getting with construction and new housing projects coming up and going on. And this is also that most architects, they graduate and they want to insert in themselves because they need job. And going to big cities and finding job is very difficult, to Istanbul and so on. You know, I'm sure every country has this problem right now. But then they insert themselves into this kind of housing markets. And then there is a lot of possibilities in East and Southeast. And war means sometimes possibilities. Post-war is sometimes possibilities for architects to build, you know. So this is the dilemma also of the attraction for architects, but for learning part, dealing with different scale, very not layered in a horizontal or vertical way, but in a very transversal way, this layer, physically and socially, and metaphorically, the concept and everything, like I spoke about violence, for example. It's a big challenge to learn and then put the architectural practice into this kind of, not as a practitioner only as a building practice, but as a social agent in this kind of geography. Is a big chance for an architect. I think is a big attraction that you can play a role as a social agent, not as a simple building builder. You know, I think this gives a kind of possibility to work in this kind of region for the architects. It's a long answer, but.
Thank you for your very interesting talk. You claimed that archiving can be a decolonization tool, and I was wondering what is the relationship between the methods of decolonizing historical research and the methods of decolonizing teaching practice? As far as I understood, you claim that an important strategy in order to decolonize teaching is the overcoming of the hierarchy between the colonizer and the colonized. And I was wondering if you would differentiate the methods employed in order to decolonize historical research and these employed in order to decolonize pedagogy. An important component of decolonizing education is the elaboration of methods that put forward collective production of knowledge and the acceptance of the fact that knowledge is produced collectively. In which sense this scheme could be applied to historical research? And in other words, how solidarity could be possible in both fields? We could say that maybe mapping could be a possible solution, putting together information coming from different people. But
I think it directly refers, archiving, the practice directly refers with memory and space. Yeah? When you bomb a space, it removes the space, the buildings and everything, and you don't, I mean, and then after 2 months, 3 months, you have totally new housings project there. I didn't show, I can show tomorrow morning another city. It's tabula rasa. Yeah? It looks like that nothing had happened there, no violence, nothing, and all the buildings, also historical buildings, everything is removed. How to keep the memory in that sense? I mean, normally, usually with photography, with mapping, with other kind of visual tools, we organize the archive, yeah? Keeping the memory of things, keeping the memory of the existing image and so on. But always, I mean, the archiving practice is a very institutional, can be very governmental, authoritarian. This is why alternative archiving from different kind of size is necessary. With tools, this is also one. For example, I was speaking with her before the talk about my colleague from Cyprus, Socrates Ratitis, who is the head of the architecture faculty in Nicosia. For years, Socrates did archiving practice with the Turkish side and with the Greek side. He had a project, as far as I remember, that was collecting narratives from people about spaces. And this mobile, I think it was a car or space, was moving around Cyprus, collecting, meeting people. And I think this was something for me, a decolonization archive, that a Greek Cypriot goes as an architect, putting as an architectural practice and spatial practice that, and collaborates. It's a collaboration, solidarity, and is a new history, new and with an archiving methods, you know? And you can use any kind of that. I'm very much into more video archiving, videogram archives. I work more on this kind of, I like very much, but I know architects, they like mappings a lot. But Graph Commons, for example, my friend, my colleague Burak Arıkan, the artist who established that, they did many alternative mapping, revealing construction industry in Turkey with the authority and corruption, for example. You know, you can see in the map the relation and so on. And this kind of, I mean, I think it's more about your positioning. You can use any tools. You can use any manual tools also in archiving, but it's more about from which, from where you are looking for. And it's important to know that, I mean, we can discuss more and more the colonized subject and the colonizer. this relation, this what we know from the 20th century, it's not so clear. There is the division, the one-way linear division is not so clear for me. You can see, you can experience, I experience colonized subject, who are colonizing the other colonized subject. So who is really speaking in what way? It's very layered. And to understand that, you need really methodology to get the right picture. This is for me the most difficult part. That also experience with the students, that they are not aware, they are so colonized, they are not aware, and they are speaking even with linguistic language or everything, you know, mostly what Spivak already wrote years ago. I mean, it's really true, you know, this is really.
Thank you.
Okay, just pick up on that. Probably a lot of people in the room have gone through or suffered through architectural education. Been maybe, I don't know if we can call that colonized. At the same time, there's this phenomena where decolonization seems to be at the forefront of people's consciousness. You can buy books called "Decolonize Your Diet," "Decolonize the Soul." If you just a quick glance at Amazon. So I'm wondering about the choice of colonization. As you talk about it sometimes as a metaphor and kind of embrace the use of colonization as a metaphor. At the same time, you're in, as we just saw, really complex territory. That's where a lot's going on. It seems like you could have equally chosen language from, occupation or wartime or these other kinds of conceptual frameworks that people have that are out there. And you mentioned some of the interesting practices of decolonization, whether archiving or creating new narratives. And so I guess, is there a sort of, on one hand, a kind of sort of real condition, or maybe you could call it a political condition of colonization that is specific to this geography? Is this something? So as you move to Cyprus, are you going to drop the decolonization, or is that something that is a problem for all of us? I wonder what the geography is of that term. How is it different from hegemony, for example? To mention Spivak, she talks about herself bringing geography to these kind of Enlightenment problems. So there's
Maybe.
a lot of little questions in there.
I think it is decolonization. I think in the text also that I give, there is a writers that they're asking question: is the colonization metaphor? Is it a metaphor? I mentioned that in the text. The term decolonization is more informed by decolonization architecture, Alessandro Petti and Sandy Hilal, when we discussed a lot more in a, I know in contemporary art especially, everything is decolonization now. It's a very hype wording, and especially after the Occupy movements, that many groups and initiation came out as decolonization and decolonization. It doesn't really function in the same way about colonial discourses that we know from the 20th century social science and theories, colonization theory. It's also a bit different of the colonization approaches and theories from the second wave of post-colonial wave of Said and Spivak and so on. I think it's something more different happening. That is what I'm trying to understand. Secondly, what does it mean for architecture? How an infrastructure, a physical entity, a kind of non-human element, is a kind of way of colonizing means spatially transforming, spatially segregating, spatially affecting, forming the society, communities, and people's life. I mean, the clear example is AI's book, HoloLand, how the official Israeli urban planning and architectural development really help to, and if you live in Palestine, you can really feel that. I mean, to try to go from Ramallah to Bethlehem is, I mean, it's just 40 minutes by car, but it's really difficult to reach. I mean, you can see the segregation, how the highways are really segregated, each towns, that people are really not so much connected. I mean, Ramallah people and Bethlehem people and so those kind of things. And I think the most interesting part for me is what I'm trying to understand, how the infrastructure plays role in that. Like I gave the water dam, like one of my master's students, she, with her, I mean, she was working in the Kurdish municipality. She's expelled now from her work. She did work on waste management, waste as a political entity, you know, how waste, garbage, trash plays a role in colonizing, influencing administration, municipality, management, and then defining spaces, urban spaces, and surrounding of Mardin. I mean, her case was Mardin. But we try to look through trash and garbage and waste. I'm trying to understand how, in what level, which infrastructures, which things, and non-human elements is conveying, is creating the function of colonization, and then how to understand, define as a profession. We have to redefine those infrastructures, because otherwise architects and planners get instrumentalized in this process, the colonization process, you know. So how to create the language and practice of decolonization. I mean.
So that sounds like a universal issue then, like not one specific to this region.
There are many examples. I think from other. I mean, what I talked about. I think many things like water dam. We can talk about India too. You know, I mean. I never been, I never worked there, but there are many territorial examples. I think it's not so far away. This is my case. I know this. I experienced that. And I don't know still. I mean, it's more as you experience, you don't know more. It's so much is opposite relation, you know. But I wonder also, what is the moment that the decolonization practice became very visible? I mean, where is the moment that I can really succeed? You know, I'm asking myself a lot that to really, and everybody asking me these days, you know, what is the decolonization education and this and that? They're asking me to write and this. Theoretically, it's very, you can write theoretically many approaches and this discussion, but I mean, decolonization is an action, it's physical, it's visual. I mean, you have to really find this kind of stage and make it sustainable, you know. But with we are using maneuver, you know. Maneuver is short. One maneuver goes to another one. I mean, what is the really then to sustain a larger project? This is what I'm thinking, you know. This is what I'm trying to understand.
So I think I'll follow up with that to talk more about the archive. So I was really interested in the way you talked about creating a record. And you were, in your talk just now, you distinguished between something like publishing an article and using, you know, the master's or the PhD thesis as a chance to create a record.
Yeah.
So I was curious about what repository makes the difference between something academic research which could become archival material in a few years versus something that transcends maybe that kind of framework. And I wonder, is it a relationship to the state?
Yes, because you can archive everything. I mean, you can, in this kind of any research, and you can publish it. You don't need to do a PhD master. Research doesn't mean academic research. I mean, there's a field of independent research. There are many activist research too. This is my case specific in this faculty. Maybe if I would have been in a different, I wouldn't care so much. I mean, you are not in a political science. You are not in a social science department, postgraduate program, which could be easier maybe, I don't know. But whatever we do such things, we get a question, what this has to do with architecture? Then you have to explain, what violence has to do with architecture, what this village eviction has to do with architecture. Why do you compare Palestinian refugee camp with the Diyarbakir neighborhood that is under surveillance and hegemony and so on? So I think this is my specific case that I wanted in the record, in the governmental record. I don't want to be arrested, but I wanted in the governmental record to have a, this is what is an academic word is understood in Turkey at least. This PhD and master thesis is, I want to have it there. And my student want to. Mm-hmm. And this is a kind of a way that they can also emancipate as an identity themselves to really, integrate their personal experience too.
So I guess to follow up on that, what is the translation from something like an artifact or a story? How is that made visible or legible to a state apparatus or legal terminology? Or it seems like there's a gap or some kind of...
From which side? From the governmental side?
So if you're, like from your students, if your students are producing
mm-hmm.
something for the record,
mm-hmm.
how is it possible to translate a kind of the relationship between the kind of embodied presence or embodied experience and...
Maybe I don't understand you. What do you mean by records? Maybe I misunderstood. I mean, I thought record you're speaking about the governmental thesis.
Yeah, exactly.
We are in this right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not a native speaker, and how they translate? You mean translate visually? What?
The question is like, is there material that cannot become legible to a state archive or a state record?
Could be.
Maybe another way question that I would have.
I'm thinking about an example, but
is the material read by the state, or is it just archived and encrypted?
Of course it's read. Of course it's read.
Yeah. Okay.
You have to be in a power. Then you can. It's more easy to do it. I mean, if you don't have power, it's very bit difficult.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so the challenge then is to present information in language that will evade censorship.
Yes, I'm trying.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Maybe now we can open it up a little bit. I think there's a question right here.
Yeah, hi everybody. I have a question, not about what you found in Mardin, but what was left behind in Istanbul. Your experience made me think also at what the CCA is making in Tokyo. They're studying architects who've left the city, and we've engaged with shrinking communities in rural areas where their action might be more useful than in the city. And I have the feeling that there is a kind of discontent of architecture because maybe the city is a place where the forces at stake are too strong, so that even though you might be a renowned architect who used to have some power, you feel that you are no longer in power. And maybe what you found in Mardin is a power, as you've just mentioned. So I was wondering whether in a few years, what will be left in the city if architects desert it from a battlefield?
For big cities, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
You know,
Istanbul.
after everybody was looking job always in Ankara and Istanbul in the academy. When we moved to Mardin after a few years, it became so popular that everybody started, my friends, my colleague, oh, why not to work in Anatolia? Because there was Istanbul and Anatolia. There was two places, yeah. And many people started to move to other faculties in Anatolia, in different cities, towns. And for that, I think it's very positive, because everything was focused on Istanbul, and it was on Istanbul. And even though we had a discussion that my colleague wanted to do this diploma project, we have to choose a site, city, something. He said Istanbul. Let's do Istanbul Gezi Park. This is the diploma project, Gezi occupation and so on. I said, okay, it's nice, Gezi occupation, Gezi Park. But why we are from Mardin, we are doing diploma on Istanbul. And he said to me, I said, Pelin, you're not an architect, you don't understand. Diploma needs a lot of scales, multiple scales, and Istanbul is a global city, is multiple scale, and it's good for a diploma that is, yeah, but there are many scales in Mardin too. I mean, I don't see so much. So this was a discussion that I was against, that why we need to, but can be. I mean, of course you can sit in Mardin and you can do a diploma project, research on Istanbul. And you can bring all those students. We did. We're taking every 3 months to Istanbul because Istanbul is something that they have to see Constantinople. They have to see, I mean, all the architecture office there, the history is there, the biennial is there. You're bringing actually, and this is part of the education too. I mean, but in one side is very positive that many architect teachers, they move to small cities and trying to do there too. And then you see that many research was about Istanbul. Housing, Istanbul, urban transformation, Istanbul, this, Istanbul. Istanbul was very hype. And I think it's nice to see different kind of city, especially on Southeast. Now, on Southeast Anatolia, there is not so much. There isn't any urban book on those cities. I'm doing now with my master PhD student. We will produce in winter, coming out. This is very important, I think. I understand what you mean in that, but this is very, I mean, it has a positive side effect now for us, you know. And many people don't leave also, I mean. They think that architecture is an urban space, you know, has to be in a global urban space. So you will.
Thank you very much that you have chosen to go to Mardin. Mardin, my family has talked about it since 90s. It was only in 2006 that I visited Mardin. And perhaps it's only you and I who have been to that place. You there, so I'm jealous of you. It's a drop-dead beautiful town. It's one of the highest achievement of architecture anywhere in the world.
I forgot to say, is a
this is why
town.
they planted their flag there. It is moving place. And the layers of architecture do not begin at 1926 there, but as you mentioned, are part of the human civilization. So if you want to understand a place, what humanity has created in the fertile delta as one of the highest achievements of civilization is Mardin.
So this is a city.
The faiths which are fighting with each other for the longest time have crossed their paths there. The Orthodox Christians have been there, their churches are there, the families who were sent out as missionaries from the Islamic faith have, if you go into their family homes and others, you will find places which are out there. I can go on and on in this regard. And this is what, I'm not blaming you. You qualified yourself in this process. And this is where Mardin is all about. I'm very saddened to see that it's all becoming unraveled. But it has been becoming unraveled for the longest time.
For the longest time, yeah.
Just on that note, I would urge you to expand your work, and if there is interest, I would be interested in going there once again. There are people who came to Canada from Mardin in year 1900 and settled this country. And they settled in Pocatière, in Kamouraska, which is the heart of Quebec. And they were very important in creating Quebec. And that faith is here too. And they have never gone back. But I was connected with them, and finally when I discovered it, I wanted to go back, and I have gone back. The greatest music in that place is there too.
Yeah.
It is a remarkable place in many other regards. I cannot wrap my head around who colonizes whom, who is planting the flag, where the country begins in 1926 with Ataturk, where the greater Syria is, and where the Kurdistan is going to be. So this, I am having greatest difficulty wrapping my head around with all this kind of long history in this place and the layers of it. And now the new colonizers who are coming with the one Silk Route, which this place was part of, is also in there. How did they produce such remarkable thing forever?
Yeah, I forgot to mention. Yeah, this is the city.
This is what you have.
Yeah.
I went there at that time. They were making the best movies, or the TV movie series in Istanbul were watched because they were all shot here.
Yeah.
Okay, we're convinced. We'll go. We'll go.
They convinced you with these soap operas which were being shot.
Is there perhaps another PhD student that has a question? Yeah?
Hi, Pelin. Thanks for the great talk. I just wanted, it seems like the story is quite connected to this institution that was set up in Mardin, and I just wanted to understand where that was coming from, who were the backers, how it was created, this quite liberal opportunity for you all to explore what you wanted to explore, and for the students to explore what they wanted to explore, what the backstory to the institution is.
The backstory, I think I told the university is a new university. It's established in 2011, and there was a rector who was really open to do something very challenging for the region.
So it's a private university?
No, it's a state university.
State university. Okay.
Yeah, and then he really wanted to. I mean, there are many cultural communities, people, religion, and he wanted to make a kind of university, establish a university that can reply and enrich also, and reply and can come attraction point. This is why there were many faculties, and this was in 2011. And then for the architecture faculty, he asked to his friend, who is an architect, and then he invited some professors who are, that generally we are working all together. We are in different universities, but we are working on the same thing, but in a different institution. So the Uğur Tanyeli, who's the head, he invited the people, and then it was like really a personal project, actually. I mean, and for the people too. And I don't know. But now he wants to. I mean, we want to do a kind of report something about that, what we lived, what is our experiences, and so on. But it needs time. I mean, but it's going on, of course. I mean, I quit recently, and my colleagues, they continue. There are newcomers. I hired new people who I really had to convince people to. People don't want to move to little spaces. People don't want to move to southeast of Turkey. I mean, it's very difficult to get teacher, professor there. It's not easy. I mean, yeah, this is what kind of. I mean, it doesn't come to my mind now, but we can speak more. Yeah, yeah.
Apparatus that's extending into Turkey, like that area of Turkey? Like, is this
Everything is state apparatus. I mean, this is no. I mean, it's a state university, and the rectors are appointed by the president, and I mean, it's very centered, conservative. I mean, private universities are a little bit more free, but it's not so much anymore. I mean, it's difficult.
So,
just much more difficult since 2 years. Yeah, getting more difficult.
So, is there a danger then in producing for the state, like producing records in the state's terms? And is that limiting our ability to imagine living in different ways?
Yes, everything is limiting.
Is there a chance to sort of effectively counter legal regimes that create states of exception, what I think might be called eminent domain practices, like where the state can come in and change property laws or reclaim land for specific purposes, and this.
The state.
Yeah,
yes.
Like are there effective ways of countering what I would probably ascribe to as like the project of colonization, in the sense that it can enact dispossession today of your land, for instance, and take away a material character of your existence through a legal framework? Are there ways that can be antagonized? Are there ways that we can attack that sort of a thing? Any sort of decolonial practices that are able to sort of counter the?
No, it's difficult. It's difficult. I mean, firstly, this kind of applications are meant to be development, and sometimes even the inhabitants, the settler who lives there, believes into that. Mm. I mean, he gets evicted, and then after he makes a deal with the state and this and that. I mean, it's a very complicated relation. I saw in front of my eyes happening several times. So it's very difficult to, as a whole, to resist or change or go to court that many people are doing. There is one example in north of Istanbul. One neighborhood did that. After 9 years court cases, suing the government continuously and working, they won the court, and they remained in their land. They went through the policy that didn't apply, and this policy that came out in 2005 and expanded into an earthquake policy that is basically changing the property statute, which leads you to evict. So there are some examples successful, but very little, because you need to work long years fighting against court cases, and so it needs a lot of. I have a friend who's an activist lawyer. He is working with the people together, and he always tells me that they need to ask you, they need to demand. There is no point that you want to go and help them. Okay, the owner who is under threat about those kind of states of exception and the force of property change or eviction, they have to come to you and request help. then he helps. Then he goes to. This is how they succeed after 9 years in the court case. I mean, this is one example about that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. We were talking about the archiving and the importance of the register and registering things. And I was thinking about the other side, that is building an audience. How can it be done? And how is it important, not just archiving, because archiving is fundamental, but how to make or to open the archive and to build the audience? And also, if the networking is an important instrument in that.
Totally, I agree. Because I think if you archive and make it open source, this is the best model of archiving. We did one example. This is BACMA with my colleague. I have a video activist collective. I'm part of the member of that. This is an open source video archive. This is we wanted to do archive of the social political movements of Turkey. This is the archive about. Maybe it's nothing to do with architecture, but just I'm giving an example. And in this, this is same with Padma in India, yeah, because we reached them. They came, they teach us, they set up with us this archive. This is Padma, run by activists from Bombay, and we got help from them, and we set up BACMA because we had a huge archive, mostly demonstration archive, videos, occupation videos, interviews, and so on and so on. And we produced a book called Autonomous Archiving. The book is PDF here online. You can download this book. This is really also very problematic. Yeah, I mean, yesterday night we had a meeting in the hotel with my colleagues from Turkey because we reached into kind of a moment that we had to discuss BACMA, this thing. Is open source, open, that means it's also very easy to track for censorship and surveillance. This is the one thing. Secondly, archives, open source, copyright problems, collective archives. I mean, this whole thing is a baggage because archives is very property. Yeah? I mean, in a basic sense, what archive is related to a paper, there is a signature, Cedric Price, and then is in the boxes of CCA, and I want to really see it, I have to get an appointment, I cannot touch it, and so on and so on. I cannot copy and take it home or something, yeah? I mean, archiving is a very institutional, very property-based practice. How can you make it open source? How can someone can come and just take away and use it? You know, this is already really issue, and by what we call autonomous archiving is a kind of, again, sounds metaphoric, but at the same time, how this whole bunch of videograms can make sense of assemblage of alternative history of social political movement of Turkey. You know, what is it? Is this possible? I mean, and we need archiving because we need to make other histories. Otherwise, it's impossible to change institutions and knowledge and so on. You know? This is one part. I mean, archive is not everything. Archiving is not the only methodology. I'm not speaking about that. But if we speak about archive and archiving, it has a lot of problematic that comes together by default as a practice, as a modernist, very property-based, very patriarchal practice. You know, this is why it's very, yeah, I'm thinking how to, we were talking about how to disseminate. You know, this question we were talking about yesterday night in the, after I came from, from.
It's not enough that is open source.
It's not enough.
It has to reach people.
It has to reach people, it has to reach the right people, you know.
And with the structures of power.
Yeah. And then you have to be under cover, you know how, I mean, I'm thinking, you know, how. Discursive platforms, bringing the archive into discursive, very physical platforms, this is what we do now. This is important to discuss about examples. There was a big meeting in Bombay in March that we participated about archiving, because Padma wrote an archive manifesto, archiving manifesto. And then they organized a meeting about different kind of archiving practices, but more activist archiving, of course. I'm speaking here specifically, I mean. There are many people working on that, many activist groups. And I was visiting Black archives in Amsterdam 2 months ago. They're working on decolonization. This was, I was very influenced. I like it very much, Black archive. This is something interesting. This kind of little small initiative that they are producing discursive practice. But then they have also archival material. They have the newspaper of Black Panther and this and that. I mean, they have archival physical material too. But then also they're trying to create discursive practice also, you know, discussion, meeting people, and so on. I think this is also challenging. I mean.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Kurt, are you prepared to ask the last question?
Yes. Whoops. Just to follow something you said, I think, a few questions ago, you were talking about this relationship between contesting, I think, the colonization of land and time, and the fact that it takes time and it takes sustained attention and engagement over potentially long periods of time. Architecture schools, as we know, frequently resist sustained engagement. Design studios in most architecture schools change topics every semester. And I'm wondering, in the context of the pedagogy that you were undertaking in this school, did you find yourself actually having to sustain projects over time,
yes.
say over multiple years?
Yes.
And
yes,
so
we're doing that. I mean, we're repeating the studio. And then we're repeating the studio in the different level. If it is like a third year fall, we're changing with the structure, pedagogical level, and do it like diploma, or we do parallel. Like in the third studio, we have the same topic, and then in the diploma, we have the same topic, and we do parallel. Only the level of pedagogical level is scaling is different. This is what we do, yeah. This is one solution, to repeat the studio, and then also the studio starts for fall, for example. You can extend to May, that which is more easier to make it in advanced architectural studio. You can extend it to May. So on the same topic, the student can work, but then in the end, they can produce something. They can do the research with the methods like interviews, site field research, and so on. And then this is what we did with the refugee camp, for example, and then extend it in spring, continue to produce, and then, yeah, this is kind of method. But you cannot do it in every architecture faculties, I mean, I think. But this is the, I mean, the architecture education has to change. Yeah. It's forcing us, I mean, the realities are forcing us to change. Technology, social transformation, I mean,
but does taking more time mean that you're more politically involved?
No, doesn't mean that.
Because because the way you just explained
engagement,
it sounds...
Engagement is not about timing. I mean, you can be 5 years living there and not really engage. You can be just 3 months and you can be engaged. This is not about that. It's about your political, ideological positioning. That's it. That's it.
Strong ending. Okay. Thank you very much, Pelin. Thank you, everyone, for coming.